Hi. So today I'm going to talk about how eye contact may be a marker of alignment during face-to-face conversation. And so when I talk about alignment, I mean the alignment of two individuals' attention to one another as they talk together. Um, and so when you think about attention, you might first think of how attention has been represented in most scientific literature. So, for example, you notice something in your environment that causes you to shift your focus. And then when you allocate your attention in this way, your pupil dilates to reflect that attention because of its link to the locus coeruleus norepinephrine system. But if you think about it, it isn't the case that your pupil simply responds to a single attention-related stimulus. Like, for example, dilates, returns to baseline, and then just is static. Rather, in your day-to-day life, your pupil actually goes on dilating and constricting, reflecting a time series of attention. And so additionally, when I think about things in my everyday environment that might elicit these kinds of responses, the first thing my mind jumps to is other people. So we're constantly paying attention to one another, both in our actual environment and on TV and social media. And so this adds another layer of complexity to this idea because now the thing that you're paying attention to is also paying attention to you. And to reflect this, your pupils actually might be indexing that attention in similar ways. And so we're interested in this sort of alignment of attention, the shared attention. And we measure the shared attention using two sets of eye tracking glasses that allow the individuals engaging in conversation to move around and react as they naturally would during social interaction while we measure their pupil dilations. And so this interest in shared attention is actually based on previous research, which finds that when people do share attention, their pupil dilations synchronize. And so in this study, they had speakers come into the lab and tell emotional stories about their lives, and they had listeners come in and listen to these stories while their pupils were tracked. And so what they found, and what you can see in this graph here, so each of these lines is an individual pupillary time series from an individual subject. And while they seem to be doing their own thing for the most part, in the beginning of the story, what you can see is in the shaded region here during the story's climax, which is when the speaker receives a kiss from her boyfriend, you can see that each individual pupil response, regardless of what it was doing before, seems to come into alignment with one another. And so we thought this finding was really interesting and we wanted to follow up with it in a more naturalistic setting. Um, and because we wanted to do this because current social environment notwithstanding, it isn't the case that normal social interaction is someone giving you a monologue through a screen. Rather, normal social interaction occurs face to face, and it requires active engagement and contributions from both parties to sort of contribute and keep the conversation moving forward. And so we wanted to extend this idea of shared attention into the naturalistic face-to-face conversation realm. And when we were thinking of things that might be related to pupillary synchrony and shared attention in conversation, one of the first things we thought of was eye contact. So eye contact is a ubiquitous social signal. Bonded couples make more of it than strangers, so it bears some relationship to social connection. And it's also notably diminished in ASD, which is a disorder characterized by social deficits. And there's also a wealth of research suggesting that we use eye contact strategically in conversation. And so for example, we might use it to get feedback about our partner's reactions to what we just said. We might use it to signal that we're done talking and to establish specific social relationships. And so with all of that in mind, we set up a conversation paradigm that we aimed to make as naturalistic as possible. So in the study, individuals came into the lab and had a conversation about whatever they wanted for 10 minutes while their eyes were tracked. And after their conversation, they went into separate rooms and independently re-watched a video of the conversation that they just had while continually rating how engaged they were during the conversation using the screen that you see here. At the end, they filled out a questionnaire about the conversation experience, and that was the entire paradigm. And so we calculated pupillary synchrony from these conversations using dynamic time warping. And dynamic time warping is just a way to warp one signal, so in this case, the pupillary time series of partner one, onto another signal, or the pupillary time series of partner two. And so the way DTW does this is by computing the cost of warping these signals onto one another at multiple time points. And so what you can see here in this figure is that this algorithm doesn't necessarily find a one-to-one mapping from time point to time point. So it basically finds the time point in partner 2's signal that best fits partner 1's signal. And so then it basically takes all these costs across the entire time series and sums them to compute the final cost of warping partner 1's signal onto partner 2's. And so it's important to note that synchrony is actually the opposite of the dynamic time warping cost, because the harder the algorithm has to work to warp these signals onto one another, the less synchrony there must be between them. So then we got annotations of eye contact for each conversation partner using videos that were recorded from the nasion of the eye tracking glasses. So the nasion is here. And those videos look like what you see in the image here. So we could annotate moments where participants looked straight into the camera as moments of eye contact. And so I'll just give you a flavor of what these videos looked like. So it's pretty clear when the person is looking straight in the camera and looking away. And we had 2 independent raters rate moments of eye contact for each video. And then we only accepted those moments where both raters agreed eye contact was being made. And so that left us with this, which is 2 time series of eye contact for a single dyad, one from partner 1 and one from partner 2. And we compared across these time series to find the moments of mutual gaze that we then included in our later analyses. So our first question was pretty general. It was basically, does pupillary synchrony actually relate to eye contact in natural conversation? So is it the case that eye contact and synchrony occur together? So in order to get a handle on this, we broke dyads' conversations into 2-minute segments. In each 2-minute segment, we calculated a few things about the conversation. So first, we calculated pupillary synchrony. Then we calculated the number of instances of eye contact that had occurred during that segment. We calculated the total time spent making eye contact that occurred during that segment. And we also included how similarly engaged dyads were and also how engaged they were overall in a linear mixed model predicting pupillary synchrony. And so my findings related to dyads engagement are in my abstract if you'd like to read about them, or I'm happy to answer questions about them offline. But in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on our findings related to eye contact during the presentation. And so what we found from this first pass analysis is that synchrony seems to increase with the number of instances of eye contact, irrespective of the amount of time spent making eye contact. So it seems to be the case that the more times dyads initiated eye contact during the conversation, the more synchronous they were. And so this gave us some first indication that eye contact was in fact related to pupillary synchrony. And so once we'd seen this, what we wanted to see next was a more fine-grained look at how eye contact might be related to synchrony. So what I mean by that is if you take this 2-minute bin, for example, you can see that what we're averaging over a lot of interesting features about the pupillary time series. So for example, in this segment here, these individuals' pupils don't really appear to be synchronous at all. Whereas if you look over here, they're almost in lockstep with one another. And so this led us to our next question, which was, are moments of high synchrony linked in time to moments of an eye contact? Is it the case that in moments when we are highly synchronous, we're also making more eye contact? And so in order to get at this, we took our time series of mutual gaze and we smoothed them into average time series reflecting the proportion of eye contact made during each window. So we used a much smaller window this time. We used 3 seconds, 3-second window, and we basically slid this window across this time series, calculating the average amount of eye contact we made as we went. And so then this produced a time series of eye contact that looked like this, which is basically the average amount of time spent making eye contact per 3-second window. We then correlated this time series with a time series of pupillary synchrony, also calculated in 3-second windows, and we did this for every dyad, resulting in a distribution of correlations reflecting the time-locked relationship between eye contact and synchrony. And so this distribution of correlations was significantly skewed from 0, but in order to get a more rigorous test of this effect, we created a null distribution by permuting eye contact and synchrony time series across dyads. So we compared, for example, one dyad's eye contact time series with another dyad's pupillary time series. And then we compared our true dyad's group mean correlation, which you can see here, to the null distribution created by these permutations. And so what you can see is that our true mean falls entirely outside this distribution, suggesting that eye contact and synchrony do in fact fluctuate in time together on a more fine temporal scale. And so just to pause for a minute here, what we've seen is that number one, synchrony and eye contact do appear to be related to one another, and they appear to be related at a fine-grained temporal scale. And so the next question we had was why? I mean, why do we synchronize during eye contact? For example, is it the case that eye contact is itself the stimulus inducing attention and subsequent synchrony? Do we make it with one another in order to zap each other back into focus, for example? And so if that's the case, we should see eye contact in one instant, leading to subsequent pupil dilation and synchrony in the next. But the opposite could also be true. So we could see that sharing attention actually leads to eye contact, and that eye contact is in fact a behavioral readout of that alignment. And if that's the case, we should see synchrony and pupil size in one instance, both leading to eye contact in the next. So in order to get a handle on the temporal effects of eye contact and synchrony, we used the fine-grained time series I showed you previously in a multi-level vector autoregression analysis. And so this model is made for the analysis of multivariate time series, and it uses a network framework to visualize the relationships between these multivariate variables. So in this analysis, variables are treated as nodes in the network, and the partial correlations between the nodes are treated as edges. And so just to break it down even further, multi-level basically refers to the fact that this is a mixed model. So the data set has multiple variables measured from multiple subjects, and each subject has multiple measurements for each variable. And so vector autoregression refers to the fact that this model computes a multivariate regression on lagged data. So it basically can predict variable 1 at a certain time from variables 2 and 3 at time -1. So in sum, MLVAR is a mixed model that can estimate temporal effects. And so you get three things from an MLVAR model. The first thing you get is a temporal network, which is basically the regression coefficients between the variables at temporal lags that you specified in your model. So if you saw a result that looks something like this, you could assume that within subjects, eye contact in one instance leads to synchrony in the next instance. The second thing you get from an MLVAR model is a contemporaneous network, which is estimated using the partial correlations of the residual variance from the temporal network. And it gives you an idea of the relationships between the variables at zero lag. So if you saw a result like this, what you could assume is that within subjects, eye contact and synchrony occur simultaneously. And then the final network that MLVAR gives you is the between subjects network, which tells you how much your variables are related to one another if you get mean-centered averages of each dyad's time series. So if you saw this result, you could assume that on average, subjects who make more eye contact also synchronize more overall. And so here are the actual results from this model on our data. Note that all these relationships are significant at alpha less than 0.05. And so what you can see in the between subjects network is that subjects with bigger pupils overall don't synchronize more overall, which makes sense. But subjects who synchronize more overall also seem to be making, on average, more eye contact with their partners. These are our contemporaneous network results, which suggest that synchrony, pupil size, and mutual gaze all track with one another, with a particularly strong relationship between pupil size and synchrony. And so finally, here's the temporal network. What you can see is that rather than mutual gaze provoking an increase in pupil size and synchrony, it's actually the opposite. Synchrony in pupil size in one instance both lead to eye contact in the next. So it seems to be the case that mutual gaze is actually the response. Mutual gaze is the indication that we are synchronizing. And so to summarize all of this, eye contact is linked to pupillary synchrony in real time, and further, synchrony precedes eye contact, suggesting that eye contact is in fact a behavioral marker of alignment that's already occurring. And so with that, I'd like to thank the Dartmouth Social Systems Lab, and specifically my PI, Thalia Wheatley. I'd like to extend a special shout out to the many eye contact annotators that created the annotations required for this research. And then finally, I'd like to thank you for listening.